Kidney is a bean-shaped twin organ which filters the blood and regulates our blood pH, our blood volume, blood pressure and osmolality, and also produce hormones like renin. Renal is situated between the T12 and L3. It is a retroperitoneal organ, which means it is behind the peritoneal membrane. It is encapsulated by the renal fascia, adipose capsule, and also renal capsule. There's indentation, which we call renal hilum, which is the exit and entry for the ureter, for the renal artery and veins, for the lymphatics and the nerves. This is the cut section of the kidney that shows renal cortex and the renal medulla. Renal medulla consists of 10 to 18 renal pyramids and ended into a renal projection called renal papilla, which will continue to the renal the calyces, which is minor calyces, and then major calyces, subsequently renal pelvis and the ureter. The renal cortex consists of outer cortical zone and inner juxtamedullary zone. An adult kidney filters about 150 liters of blood a day, which means if we have 5 liters of blood in our body, the entire volume of blood is filtered about 30 times a day. The renal artery, which receives the blood from the heart via descending aorta, will divide into segmental artery, interlobar artery, arcuate artery, corticoradial artery, and subsequently it will it will divide into afferent arteriole, into the glomerulus, which is a network of capillaries, and subsequently efferent arteriole, which will go into the peritubular capillaries before it enters the vein, which will divide into arcuate vein, interlobar vein, and subsequently renal vein. The functional unit of a kidney is our nephron. One kidney contains about 1 million of nephrons. This is made of renal corpuscle and also renal tubule. So when the blood comes from the afferent arteriole, it goes into the glomerular capillaries, and subsequently it is filtered in the Bowman's capsule. After undergoing filtration, the solute, some of them will be reabsorbed at the peritubular capillaries into the renal vein, while some of them will be secreted back into the tubules and subsequently excreted as urine. So this photo shows a renal corpuscle, where the filtration begins, which is made of glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. So the lining of the glomerular cells is actually the endothelium, which is fenestrated. So that is how the leakage can occur here, where the molecules like amino acid, glucose can pass to the Bowman's capsule. But some larger molecules like proteins, they may or may not pass the fenestration, and then there's another layer of actually basement membrane. So if the protein is able to pass the fenestration in the endothelium, this will be prevented by the basement membrane. And finally, there is epithelium or tubular cells, which also contains a cell which has a feet-like projection called podocytes. So this podocytes actually it has filtration slits which allows the passage of water, glucose, ionic salts, but not large molecules. Juxtaglomerular complex helps to regulate our blood pressure and the GFR, which is the blood through the glomeruli each minute. So it consists of cells which lines the distal convoluted tubule, like the macular densa cells, extraglomerular messenger cells, and juxtaglomerular cells. This juxtaglomerular complex, the macular densa cells, senses the low sodium and chloride level and send the signal to the juxtaglomerular cells with the help of extraglomerular messenger cells. The juxtaglomerular cells then receive this signal, and it also senses the low blood pressure. This will secrete the renin, which increases the sodium reabsorption, increases the blood volume, increases the constriction of the blood vessel, and subsequently increase the blood pressure. Here we can see the nephrons, which consists of the glomerulus, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, which consists of descending and ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, and subsequently collecting duct. At the proximal convoluted tubule, there will be a reabsorption of sodium, chloride, potassium, glucose, amino acid, urea, and also bicarb. While in the descending limb of the loop of Henle, mainly the water will be reabsorbed, while at the ascending limb, sodium, chloride, and potassium will be reabsorbed. At the distal convoluted tubule, the sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and bicarb will be reabsorbed, while in the collecting duct, there will be reabsorption of sodium, chloride, urea, and also water. At the proximal convoluted tubule, creatinine and certain drugs and also hydrogen ion will be secreted. And at the distal convoluted tubule, the hydrogen ion, the potassium will be secreted, and there is also sodium and potassium exchange. Sodium and water play a key role in regulating the blood pressure, while the bicarbonate and also hydrogen ion play a key role in acid-base balance. So we will zoom in what happens at the proximal convoluted tubule. We can divide into lumen and also the cellular part. So the cellular part will come into contact with the vasa recta, where reabsorption and secretion occurs. So there is the movement of sodium and glucose with amino acid into the cellular part, where this will go into the reabsorb in the vasa recta. There's also exchange of sodium and potassium via active transport. So the sodium will be reabsorbed in exchange with the potassium ion. And this sodium ion is in exchange of the hydrogen ion, and the hydrogen ion moves into the lumen and can combine with the bicarbonate ion to produce carbonic acid. Carbonate anhydrase enzyme can divide this into water and carbon dioxide, which can move freely into the cellular and subsequently into the vasa recta. So the bicarbonate ion will be reabsorbed into the vasa recta together with sodium ion. So here at the proximal convoluted tubule, the movement of the bicarbonate ion is dependent on the sodium ion. At the ascending loop of Henle, there's also a movement of the potassium into the cellular component, and which will be reabsorbed with potassium and also chloride, and sodium also will be reabsorbed back into the vasa recta. And there's also there is sodium potassium ATP channel, which is also active transport. The sodium will go into the vasa recta in exchange of the potassium, which will be secreted into the lumen. At the distal convoluted tubule, there's also sodium and potassium active transport, in which the sodium will be reabsorbed into the vasa recta in exchange of the potassium, which will be secreted into the lumen. The sodium will move together with chloride into the vasa recta, and the magnesium and calcium will also be reabsorbed at the vasa recta. At the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct, there will be a movement of reabsorption of sodium into the vasa recta in exchange of the hydrogen ion. There'll also be secretion of the chloride ion in exchange of the bicarbonate ion. So the bicarbonate ion reabsorption at the distal convoluted tubule is not sodium dependent, unlike the proximal convoluted tubule. Again, the bicarbonate and the hydrogen ion will form the carbonic acid and can convert into the water and also carbon dioxide, which can freely be reabsorbed at the vasa recta. There's also a potassium and sodium channel, which is mainly regulated by the aldosterone hormone, which is secreted by the adrenal cortex, precisely the zona glomerulosa. This aldosterone will increase the sodium and chloride reabsorption, which causes a hypernatremia in exchange with the potassium. Thus, it causes hypokalemia. Finally, we'll be discussing about the collecting duct, which mainly water reabsorption occurs here via the channel called aquaporine channel. This channel is controlled by the ADH, which is secreted by the posterior pituitary. ADH is antidiuretic hormone, which also known as vasopressin. ADH acts by increasing the opening of the aquaporine channel, in which there will be water reabsorption. Thus, it makes the urine osmolality increase. So finally, this is an overview of the reabsorption and secretion that occurs at the nephron unit, and also the site where the diuretics act. So if we can see at the proximal convoluted tubule, the osmotic diuretics like mannitol and glucose will increase the water reabsorption, while at the loop of Henle, loop diuretics act here at the proximal, the distal convoluted tubule, the proximal part. This is where the thiazide diuretics act, while at the distal part, there's a site for osmotic and potassium sparing diuretic, and at the collecting duct, this is the site of action for potassium sparing and also osmotic diuretics to act.